brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that supports life and family. 5% of your monthly plan price goes to your favorite charity. Buy the way you believe at CharityMobile.com and use promo code TRADITION.
I've received several messages from people asking for an update to the supposed alleged coming ban of the traditional Latin Mass. Rorate Caeli posted an update. I can summarize it here for you. The document exists, it's complete, and it hasn't been signed yet. And Pope Francis is allegedly receiving pressure from pretty much every position imaginable to take various actions against the document. And my suspicion is he hasn't signed it yet because there's one really trait of Pope Francis that I actually kind of like, and that's those who are nakedly ambitious around him tends not to like them very much. I don't know if he doesn't like the competition or if maybe there's some virtue there. I don't know what it is, but we've seen this many times before, that those who clearly are motivated by ambition tend to not do too well around him. And I did a video about this about a week or two ago. There was an archbishop named Viola who desperately wants to become a cardinal. He's the man assisting Cardinal Arthur Roche on this task. Roche is the one in charge of the liturgy at the Vatican. Viola wrote the document and has been putting pressure on Francis to sign it. And it's a pretty draconian document. Meanwhile, other bishops, including many Bergoglians, have said, don't publish this thing yet. There's no reason to do it, to let the status quo take shape, and we've got more important things to work on. And it seems that view has won out. However, there has been a mixed bag since then. Some dioceses have received word from Rome that they've gotten extensions on their indult TLMs, basically, that the extensions on not having to implement Traditionis Custodes fully yet, that they have multiple parishes more than the document actually allows. Other dioceses have gotten restrictions imposed on them, saying, no, you do not get an extension, your TLMs are gone. Business goes on as usual in this. It's worth noting that document would, if signed, immediately end all those extensions. That's the one thing virtually everybody who has confirmed that such a document exists says is in the document, that it does not allow for further extensions. Business goes on as usual. And we've seen that while that document not being signed and being published is a good thing, that doesn't mean we're out of the hot water yet. So we go to Gloria TV for this headline. Institute of Christ the King kicked out of an English church. If you're not familiar with the Institute of Christ the King, they're very similar to the FSSP, governed the same kind of way, have the same kind of relationship with Rome. The principal difference, honestly, in a way that matters for you and me, is that the Institute of Christ the King and the FSSP have sort of aesthetics differences. Yes, it goes deeper than that, but again, for the typical layperson, you'll notice the main thing is that there's a lot more artistry that goes into how the traditional Mass is celebrated with the Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest. That much more emphasis on the High Mass and the music that goes with it, and with the things the priest wears during the Mass. It's not to say there's anything against the FSSP at all. I typically go to Mass with them, but a layperson who much more knowledgeable than I am about the more fundamental differences says you can boil it down to the FSSP seeming to have more focus on the low Mass, the Institute of Christ the King seeming to have more focus on the High Mass, though the FSSP at my parish at least offer more High Masses than low Masses. But if you ever watch online a Mass celebrated by the FSSP and the Institute of Christ the King, a High Mass, you will see the differences. That's about the only thing I can tell you. But they're both in an unambiguous relationship with Rome, unlike, say, the SSPX, who are in canonical limbo, basically, to borrow the terminology some more moderate voices about the SSPX have used when discussing their situation. You see more hostile implementation of Traditionis Custodes targeting the FSSP and the Institute of Christ the King in Europe than in America. That's not to say the United States has been, clear of this stuff, but Europe has more hostility. We've seen this in France, and now we're seeing this in the United Kingdom. So go to Gloria TV initially for this story before we turn elsewhere. From the article, quote, Reverend John Johnson retired from active ministry at the historic St. Mary Church in Wigan, Archdiocese of Liverpool, at the end of 2023 for health reasons and passed in April. Archbishop Malcolm McMahon of Liverpool invited the Roman Rite Institute of Christ the King to take over that church. McMahon has a reputation of being rather friendly towards the Mass and has already celebrated it himself. But recently, the Archbishop's invitation came to an abrupt end. At the Mass on the 7th of July, Canon Cristofoli of the Institute said that he had been told the day before that it would be the final Mass. He explained that the Archdiocese had decided not to hand over the pastoral care to the Institute because of unspecified, quote, financial considerations. The Institute had offered to buy the church and a house in Wigan for the priest to live in. This offer has been rejected by the trustees of the Archdiocese. A spokesperson for the Archdiocese of Liverpool added, Archbishop Malcolm has written to the Institute to thank them for the time they have so generously given to help us discern the future of St. Mary's Church. They will no longer celebrate Mass at St. Mary's. There will be a Mass at St. Mary's every Saturday evening at 5 p.m. Parishioners fear that the church will be closed down. The faithful pleaded for the Institute to stay, but according to WiganToday.net, the Archdiocese has refused. End quote. But that's the quick version. Like I said, many are resting assured that because a new document going further has yet to be signed by Francis, that things are going to be fine. Meanwhile, we see the grip tightening on the liturgy, with groups like this being kicked out of dioceses in many places. This has happened at least once or twice in the United States in the last year or so. Now, the U.S., though, however, seems to be the most tolerant of the traditional liturgy among the bishops, largely because many of the bishops in the U.S. liked the Summorum Pontificum arrangement, and realized that if it wasn't for Francis, the strident voices online rallying the laity wouldn't be nearly as powerful as we have become. Plus, they honestly see that most of us really only critique the worst among the bishops and leave the rest of the U.S. bishops mostly alone, which they seem fine with, and I will admit that that's the case. How many of you have noticed that most of the time when I talk about an American bishop, it's like the same 5 or 6 of them. Most of them are left alone. There's a reason for that. But let's dig a little deeper in the story about the Institute coming up with a solution to the issue themselves that was rejected by the diocese. So it shows that it puts the truth to the lie that this is not about financial problems at all. Again, we go to Wigan Today, a secular news outlet out of the UK, right from the area where this happened, for this headline. Priests offered to buy a house in Wigan to keep historic church going, but Catholic bosses turned them down. That's a pretty accurate summation of the story, to be honest. The diocese claimed the issue was a housing one and a financial one, so the Institute found a solution to the professed problem. Then it turned out to not be the problem at all. What was the problem? It was the Mass itself. They never admitted this, but that became pretty obvious. See, for the time being, priests for the diocese will offer a TLM on Saturdays for the parishioners, meaning they cannot get their Sunday obligation fulfilled at the TLM anymore, which isn't a coincidence. This is tightening the grip of Traditionis Custodes. The point of Traditionis Custodes is to, quote, bring the laity back to the Novus Ordo Missae. That is expressed in the document or in the letter written by Pope Francis to the bishops that accompanied it, one or the other. But note how this was handled. From the article, quote, the laity have called on the Archdiocese to allow the Institute of Christ the King, which practices the Old Latin Mass, to be allowed to take full responsibility for St. Mary's, but it is understood the Archdiocese has refused, citing unspecified financial reasons. This was despite the Preston-based Catholic order even offering to, quote, buy a house in Wigan to keep the church going. Michael Durnan, who was present at the final Mass held by the Institute at St. Mary's, said, quote, Canon Cristofoli, who offered the Mass, explained at the beginning of his sermon that he and the Institute didn't learn that it would be their final Mass until Saturday, the day before. He explained that the trustees of the Archdiocese had decided not to hand over the pastoral care to the Institute because of, quote, financial considerations. This response prompted an approach to the trustees by Canon Montjean of the Institute to offer to buy St. Mary's and the presbytery, or even without the presbytery if the trustees didn't wish to sell. Canon Montjean stated that the Institute would buy a house in Wigan to serve as a residence for the canons serving at St. Mary's. This offer was turned down by the trustees of the Archdiocese. A spokesperson for the Archdiocese of Liverpool said, Archbishop Malcolm has written to the Institute to thank them for the time they have so generously given in helping us to discern the future of St. Mary's Church. They will no longer be celebrating Mass at St. Mary's. There will be Mass each Saturday evening at St. Mary's at 5 p.m. It is important that parishioners at St. Mary's and St. William's parishes, St. John and St. Patrick churches, are given updates as soon as possible. So the Archdiocese of Liverpool will not be issuing any comments on this matter until the parishioners have been informed of developments. Father Johnson was originally from Scott Lane, Wigan, and worked as a butcher before studying for the priesthood. He was also well known to many as the uncle of Wigan Warriors legend Sean Edwards. Under his stewardship, St. Mary's became one of the few town center churches to remain open during the day for visitors to call in for private prayer along with the daily Mass. End quote. One of the few places to get a daily Mass, and it's gone now. And if you can go in for private prayer and daily Mass during the day, chances are you could probably go to the parish office and ask if there's a priest available for confession, and you might be able to have your confession heard during the day. Gone now. All of it. Why? Because of their hostility to the traditional Mass. And they said it was financial reasons too, and they never really said what it was. I'm going to remind you of something here. People have crunched these numbers over and over again, and they find consistently that traditionalist parishes tend to have more money given by the laity in the collection basket, metaphorically or literally, depending on how you give your tithe every week, than the typical ordinary form parish. The numbers are pretty consistent. And it could very well be that that's the reason. Because a lot of times those parishes run by the Institute, the FSSP, yes, they give some to the diocese. They're required to do so. But oftentimes, they give a lot of their money back to the orders that they run. Yes, and they keep up with their parish as they're supposed to, but a lot goes back to those organizations. And I kind of wonder if that's what is part of this here. Plus, the other financial part of this, the part that's always looming over these stories. How much is the property worth that parish sits on? In Europe, you've seen these horrible stories many, many times, and I kind of wonder if that's where we're headed here now, where a beautiful traditional parish with a high altar and beautiful sacred art and stained glass windows and all the rest of it ends up being sold, put on the market, turned into yoga studios, restaurants, bars. You name any inappropriate use for a parish, and a parish has been sold and turned into it. I wonder if that's what's going to happen here. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. If you've ever thought about supporting the work of Return to Tradition through Patreon or the Join button or Subscribe Star, there are options in the description box below. It does help keep these daily messages coming. And as always, pray for the Church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.